Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're diving into material it's part ancient history, part political commentary, and it's really the absolute foundation for how we understand future global power structures.
It is.
We are pulling the sources on the prophet Daniel, a man whose life literally spanned the entire duration of a captive nation.
It's a truly monumental body of work, and what the sources give us is this powerful shortcut to its core essence.
Right.
Daniel's writings, they weave together two central massive themes. First, you get this series of dramatic, personal, and geopolitical contests.
Contests, that's a good word for it.
And they're designed specifically to demonstrate the absolute sovereignty of the God of Israel, Yahweh, over the mightiest potentates the earth has ever produced.
This high drama we all tend to remember. The young man's fidelity, the fiery furnace, the lion's den.
Exactly.
But the second theme, as you mentioned, that's the one that gives us this global architectural blueprint that completely shifts how we have to look at history.
It really does. The second theme is the divine roadmap for what's called the times of the Gentiles, this succession of world empires: Babylon, Persia, Greece, and then Rome.
And it's not just a list.
No, it's a blueprint that details their rise, their fall, and it all culminates in the ultimate destruction of all human systems of power.
And the establishment of an eternal kingdom that is, as the text says, not made by human hands.
Exactly. So our mission today is to unpack that roadmap and to really understand the profound message Daniel was delivering to a people who, they felt utterly abandoned.
And we have to start in 605 BC. It's a dark, just devastating moment for the people of Judah. For anyone looking on, it genuinely seemed like the local gods of Babylon had, decisively defeated Yahweh.
And that is the critical historical frame. Daniel's life began and spanned the entire 70-year duration of the Babylonian captivity.
The whole thing?
The whole thing. And before this, you have to understand the ancient world saw conflict as a battle between gods.
Right. If your army wins, your god is stronger.
Simple as that. So when Jerusalem was ravaged, when the temple, the literal dwelling place of Yahweh, was desecrated and lay in ruins, the perception was crystal clear.
Yahweh was impotent.
Impotent, defeated. The gods of Babylon had triumphed. So the book of Daniel is this divine, written, theological response to that very perception. It's there to encourage these despairing exiles and to make sure they knew that the seemingly defeated Yahweh actually controls every single minute detail of geopolitical history. And, he writes the end of the story.
Okay, so the sources are pretty clear that the destruction and the exile, they weren't one single event. It was a drawn-out process, almost designed to break the nation's will.
Yeah, they describe 3 distinct waves of deportation carried out by Nebuchadnezzar.
And that's vital for understanding the context, right?
Absolutely. The first deportation was in 605 BC. This came right after Nebuchadnezzar's huge victory at the Battle of Carchemish,
Which basically redrew the map of the ancient world.
It ended Assyrian influence and established Babylon as the superpower of the Near East. Period. So Judah immediately becomes a vassal state. Nebuchadnezzar invades, and he takes these royal and noble captives, the best and brightest of Judean society.
Including Daniel.
Including a teenage Daniel. But it wasn't just people, and this part is so important.
It was the physical symbols of their faith.
Crucially, yes. He carried off some of the sacred vessels from Solomon's temple. Now, in the ancient Near East, a king seizing the sacred objects of a defeated enemy and putting them in his own god's temple was the ultimate public display of his God's victory.
It's a statement.
It's a clear, unambiguous statement that Yahweh was defeated and was now subordinate to Marduk, who was the chief Babylonian god.
And that sets the stage for the second wave, which brings another key prophetic voice into the exile.
Yes, the second deportation happens in 597 BC. Nebuchadnezzar comes back because of some political instability in Jerusalem, and this time he takes King Jehoiachin, most of the remaining leaders, and the prophet Ezekiel.
So you have Daniel and Ezekiel, 2 of the greatest prophets of the exile, as contemporaries.
Contemporaries, but with very different roles. Daniel is in the palace, in the heart of the empire. Ezekiel is out among the people by the Shebar River.
And then comes the final devastation in 586 BC. This is the one that really sealed the belief that God had truly abandoned them.
This was the catastrophe, the final wave. King Zedekiah had, frankly, foolishly rebelled. He trusted in the fleeting strength of Egypt over the dominance of Babylon.
A bad bet.
A terrible bet. So after a grueling 18-month siege, Jerusalem falls. The city walls are breached, and the temple, the very symbol of God's presence, is burned to the ground.
And the cruelty of the punishment was just extreme.
It was. Zedekiah is taken captive. His sons are executed right in front of him, and then his eyes are put out.
So the last thing he ever saw was the death of his legacy.
The death of his legacy. The devastation was total, brutal, and it seemed absolutely permanent.
So Daniel, who arrives in that first wave as a teenager, he occupies this really unique position. He's a prophet, yes, but not like a public preacher. Not like a Jeremiah or Ezekiel.
No, Daniel was an administrator. He was a public servant, a government official functioning entirely within a hostile Gentile court.
So his audience wasn't the people of Israel.
Not directly. He wasn't sent to deliver sermons to the exiles. He was placed strategically in the heart of the world's most powerful empire to demonstrate God's sovereignty to the rulers themselves.
And his ministry was just remarkable for its duration.
I mean, a full 70 years. It spanned the entire captivity and continued well into the Medo-Persian period.
Which means he likely lived into his 80s.
At least. This long career gave him unparalleled access and influence, and that enabled the dramatic contests we're about to get into.
And his name, God is my judge, it just seems to encapsulate the entire burden of his work there in Babylon.
It absolutely does. The name itself became his mission statement, demonstrating to kings and subjects alike that despite the destruction of Jerusalem, the God of Israel was still the ultimate judge of all world affairs.
And his decrees were final.
His decrees were final.
So Nebuchadnezzar's policy for these high-value Judean captives was, well, insidious. It wasn't simple destruction. It was this sophisticated attempt at total cultural assimilation.
It was an extremely enlightened policy, if you want to call it that. It was designed to steal the future leaders of the captive nation and turn them into loyal Babylonian assets.
Right.
The decree was to choose young, flawlessly healthy men of royal or noble descent, skilled in wisdom, knowledge, quick to understand, and put them through a 3-year intensive training program.
Immersing them in the culture.
Completely. The literature, the language, the culture of the Chaldeans, the Babylonian intellectual elite, they're learning Chaldean history, law, religion, astronomy, everything.
This sounds less like captivity and more like a high-level forced exchange program designed to strip them of their core identity.
That's precisely what it was. And the first and most personalized assault on that identity was the renaming ritual.
Because in the ancient world, a name was everything.
Renaming someone was an act of ownership, of subjugation. It was a calculated psychological effort to condition them to think of themselves as servants of the conquering gods, to erase their loyalty to Yahweh.
Let's just reflect on the contrast in the names, because this is really where the spiritual warfare started.
Their original Hebrew names all glorified Yahweh. You have Daniel, God is my judge; Hananiah, the Lord is gracious; Mishael, who is what God is; and Azariah, the Lord has helped.
They were living, breathing testimonies to their God.
They were. And they were swapped for names glorifying the pagan pantheon.
So Daniel becomes Belteshazzar.
Meaning Bel's prince, Bel being the chief deity, Marduk. Hananiah becomes Shadrach, command of Aku, the moon god. Mishael becomes Meshach, and Azariah becomes Abednego, servant of Nebo, the god of writing and learning.
The goal was to just force them to identify with the gods of the court they were now serving.
Exactly. Which brings us to the first flashpoint of fidelity in Chapter 1, the diet test. This seems like such a small detail. It's just food. But it sets the entire precedent for Daniel's 70-year career.
It's a test of walking in holiness, right? Not defiling oneself.
And it was crucial for 2 big reasons. First, the royal food and the wine were almost certainly offered or dedicated to the pagan gods before being consumed.
So eating them would be an act of worship.
Participating in Babylonian worship, yes. And second, the Mosaic law had very strict dietary restrictions that the royal delicacies would have absolutely violated. So for Daniel to eat this food would have signaled his cultural and his spiritual submission to Babylon.
And Daniel doesn't stage some dramatic rebellion. He handles it with wisdom and courtesy.
He'd already made up his mind not to defile himself, but he was incredibly prudent in his approach. He courteously requests permission from the chief official, and he offers a positive, practical alternative.
Vegetables and water for 10 days.
Literally pulse, so things grown from seeds or grain and water, for 10 days. And the risk for the official was enormous, because if he made the king's chosen servants look weak or malnourished, his own life was on the line.
But Daniel puts his faith on a testable 10-day trial.
He does. And the outcome was this immediate, visible demonstration of divine endorsement.
After 10 days, they actually looked healthier and better nourished than the guys eating the rich royal food.
They did. But the blessing didn't stop at just physical health. The ultimate reward was intellectual and spiritual. Our sources state that God endowed them with superior knowledge, skill, and wisdom.
Making them 10 times better than any of Babylon's wise men.
10 times better. And Daniel specifically received this supernatural insight into interpreting visions and dreams. And this ability, rooted in his simple act of obedience, was the precise gift he was going to need to face the very next existential challenge to Nebuchadnezzar's empire.
And that divinely granted knowledge gets put to the test immediately in chapter 2, where the contest shifts from, a cultural battle to this ultimate showdown of spiritual and supernatural revelation.
It does.
This story is really the launch pad for all the apocalyptic material in the book.
This is where Yahweh proves that all the combined wisdom of the Chaldean elite, their magic, their astrology, their sorcery, is utterly bankrupt compared to divine knowledge.
So Nebuchadnezzar is plagued by this disturbing recurring dream.
In the second year of his reign, yes. He was suffering physically and mentally because of this anxiety.
But his demand was completely unique and really impossible for any human to fulfill. He didn't just want the interpretation, he wanted proof of legitimacy.
He refused to tell his wise men the dream itself.
That's the key.
That's the key. He demanded they tell him both the dream and its interpretation. If they could correctly state the dream, then he would trust the interpretation.
Why such an extreme demand?
Because he didn't trust them. He likely suspected they would just invent some favorable interpretation to save their own skins. If they failed this impossible task, they faced brutal consequences. Dismemberment and their homes reduced to rubble.
And this immediately exposed the intellectual and spiritual limits of the world's most advanced pagan kingdom.
They admitted defeat. They replied, "There is no man on earth who is able to disclose the king's secret." And then they make this critical theological statement.
What's that?
They say only the gods could do such a thing, but their pagan deities don't live among mortals.
Wow.
They stated the absolute truth about their limited, distant gods, confirming their own impotence. So Nebuchadnezzar, in his fury, orders the execution of all the wise men.
Which now included Daniel and his friends.
Who are now part of this administrative class, yes.
So Daniel requests time. And the contrast between what he does and what the Chaldeans were doing is just stark.
The Chaldeans were desperately trying to appeal to the king. Daniel gathers his friends for prayer. They ask the God of heaven for mercy and for revelation. And the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision.
And when Daniel finally gets before the enraged king, his first action is one of deep humility.
He makes it absolutely clear. He says, "This revelation is not because I possess superior human wisdom, but because there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries."
He gives all the glory to God.
The glory went exactly where it belonged,
Yeah.
to the source of all power, Yahweh, who controls the destiny of all nations and kingdoms.
Okay, so the dream itself, this terrifying, impressive, massive statue, is the framework for all of Gentile world history moving forward.
It is.
It had features that immediately spoke volumes about the nature of human power.
Right. The statue represents the entire continuum of Gentile power, from Nebuchadnezzar all the way until the second coming of Christ. And Daniel highlights 4 crucial characteristics in the sources.
What are they?
Decreasing intrinsic value. You go from gold to iron and clay, but at the same time increasing strength and durability. Then you have the use of multiple substances and its inherent, top-heavy, ultimately unstable structure.
The decline from gold to iron seems key. It's like a descent into spiritual degradation and political brutality.
That's a good way to put it. The head of gold was explicitly identified as Babylon, ruled by Nebuchadnezzar, its absolute unified sovereignty.
And the next part?
The chest and arms of silver represented Medo-Persia. Inferior in quality because their power was restricted.
Yeah.
Persian monarchs couldn't annul a law once it was issued, which becomes very relevant later.
Right.
But it was superior in size and duration. The 2 arms symbolize Media and Persia as a dual kingdom.
And the pace of expansion seems to just increase with the next 2 kingdoms.
Oh, absolutely. The belly and thighs of bronze represented Greece, particularly Alexander the Great's empire. Even larger geographically, covering massive swaths of territory, but less unified than the gold and silver before it. It eventually splits up.
And then the legs of iron.
Rome. Rome was just unparalleled in its crushing strength. It dominated the map and lasted for hundreds of years, represented by the 2 legs east and west.
But the vision doesn't just stop with Rome's historical dominance. It jumps forward to a future composite stage.
And this is the critical prophetic element. The feet and toes iron mixed with wet, baked clay. The sources identify this as a later, divided, or maybe a revived phase of that 4th kingdom.
So it's partly strong?
Partly strong, that's the iron, but hopelessly fragile, the clay. It's marked by this deep, irreconcilable disunity. The people are mixed, they're taking alliances, but, as the text says, without adhering to one another.
It sounds like our world.
It represents the chaotic, divided world system that exists immediately before the end times.
And here we reach the ultimate demonstration of God's sovereignty, this sudden intervention that destroys the entire system of human rule.
The rock. The sources are so specific. The stone is cut out, but not by human hands.
Signifying a divine, non-human origin.
Exactly. And crucially, it strikes the feet, that final phase of the world system, and it shatters the entire structure instantly. Gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay are all crushed into chaff and just blown away.
And this rock is the symbol for what?
For the everlasting fifth kingdom raised up by the God of heaven, the messianic kingdom of Christ.
So the insight here is profound. God doesn't just cut off the final tyrannical empire. He destroys the entirety of man's self-governed, progressively corrupt system,
sweeping away thousands of years of human ambition in one violent, decisive act.
It's incredible.
Absolutely. The message is that these four systems, despite being different metals, are fundamentally one entity, a world empire opposed to God. When Christ returns, he destroys the entire monument to human pride and replaces it with his own eternal unified sovereignty.
Which is utterly fascinating because immediately after Nebuchadnezzar learns his empire is merely the head of gold in a system destined for decline, his profound arrogance leads him to try and reject the prophecy.
He does.
By building an entirely gold statue.
It's a spectacular act of prideful defiance against the prophetic word. He erects this colossal 90-foot-tall golden statue on the plain of Dura.
He's basically saying, my kingdom is permanent.
He's saying, my kingdom will not decline to silver, bronze, and iron. My rule is permanent, all gold, and forever. It was a direct public act of rejecting the prophecy Daniel had just delivered.
And this image was linked to a mandatory political and religious loyalty test, backed by the ultimate threat.
The decree was absolute. Upon hearing the required state music, everyone, regardless of rank or nationality, must bow down or face immediate execution by being thrown into the blazing fiery furnace.
This wasn't just about religion, was?
No, it was forced, centralized state loyalty, demanding that the ruler be the sole object of ultimate allegiance.
But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Daniel's three friends, they refused. They chose fidelity to the second commandment over fear of the king.
And the charge was brought by the malicious Chaldean officials, the very same men who had been humiliated by Daniel in chapter 2.
Ah, revenge.
They accused the Hebrews of disloyalty, implying the king made a mistake appointing Jews to high office. And when they're confronted, the Hebrews deliver that iconic response, which is just a masterclass in committed faith, fully resigned to God's will.
They weren't arrogant. They were just stating their certainty in God's power.
They stated first that their God was able to rescue them and would rescue them. But then they add that critical, transcendent phrase.
But even if he does not.
But even if he does not, we still will not serve your gods or bow before your image. This wasn't a demand for a miracle. It was an absolute commitment to obedience, regardless of the outcome.
The king's fury was immense. He's challenging the authority of the Almighty, and his ego just couldn't handle the refusal.
He heated the furnace 7 times hotter, so hot that the soldiers who threw the Hebrews in were killed by the flames.
And the three men fell into the fire, securely bound.
And then comes the miracle that completely undermined Nebuchadnezzar's authority. He was startled to see 4 men, unbound and walking in the fire, and the fourth having the appearance of a son of the gods.
Which the sources universally understand to be, what, a divine manifestation?
Yes, often interpreted as the angel of the Lord or the pre-incarnate Christ.
So they weren't delivered from the fire, they were delivered in it. What was the symbolic significance of them emerging completely untouched?
The only thing the fire consumed were the ropes that bound them, the very symbols of Nebuchadnezzar's power and jurisdiction. They emerged without their clothes even singed, not even the smell of smoke or fire on them.
And Nebuchadnezzar is forced to acknowledge this.
He has to. He issues a decree acknowledging the reality of Yahweh, stating, "For there exists no other God who can deliver in this way." This contest confirmed that God's people are protected even when placed under maximum pressure by world rulers.
So despite witnessing the destruction of his statue's prophecy in chapter 2 and the failure of his fiery test in chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar's pride was, well, immense.
Always.
So chapter 4 shows that God needed to provide the most severe, personalized lesson possible to just strip away the king's arrogance.
The central lesson of this chapter is that the Most High is sovereign over the highest human sovereign. Nebuchadnezzar was enjoying the view from his palace, feeling like a great flourishing tree, which was the subject of his second dream.
Right, the tree.
He saw a massive tree, tall and strong, providing for all creation, that was suddenly chopped down by a holy sentinel, an angel.
And the nature of the judgment was designed to inflict total humiliation.
The command was so precise: leave the stump banded with iron and bronze until 7 periods of time passed. And here is the core of the psychological punishment. The tree man's mind be altered from that of a human being to an animal's mind.
Why?
The judgment was decreed, as Daniel explained, so that those who are alive may understand that the Most High has authority over human kingdoms, and he bestows them on whomever he wishes. And then he adds this line: he establishes over them even the lowliest of human beings.
That last sentence is key. It means sovereignty is not inherent to the powerful, it's just loaned out.
And God can give it to anyone, even the lowest of people.
Exactly. Daniel, with great reluctance, advises the king to repent, knowing how severe the coming judgment would be.
But the sources say the repentance was delayed.
It was. The judgment came 12 months later, triggered by one final, massive act of pride.
The king was walking on his palace battlements, looking over his capital, and he just boasted in his own self-sufficiency.
He exclaimed, "Is this not the great Babylon that I have built? By my own mighty strength and for my majestic honor?"
And the judgment was immediate.
Immediately, a voice from heaven pronounced the sentence. Nebuchadnezzar was struck with insanity, likely a condition known as clinical lycanthropy, where he believed he was an animal.
Unbelievable.
He was driven from society, eating grass like oxen until his hair grew long like eagle's feathers and his nails like bird's claws.
There's a profound irony there. The man who wanted his kingdom to be all gold was reduced to living like the lowliest of creatures. It is. And the preservation of the kingdom during his insanity, symbolized by that stump remaining banded, is a testament to God's precise control.
The kingdom was held in trust.
Exactly. No enemy was allowed to take it because God intended for the man to learn his lesson and be restored. And Nebuchadnezzar did learn it. After the appointed 7 periods of time, he looked up toward heaven.
And his sanity instantly returned.
It did. And he composed this powerful hymn of praise, acknowledging Yahweh's everlasting authority and that all the inhabitants of the earth are regarded as nothing. He moved from claiming absolute self-derived sovereignty to acknowledging that all power belongs solely to the God of Israel. This narrative is maybe the most explicit statement on divine sovereignty over human rule in the entire book.
Okay, now we jump forward significantly, 66 years after Daniel's arrival. Daniel is an elderly statesman, probably in his 80s. The great Nebuchadnezzar is long gone and the empire is crumbling.
Right.
We're introduced to Belshazzar, who commits the ultimate fatal act of sacrilege.
The historical context here is absolutely essential. The events of chapter 5 occurred in 539 BC. Belshazzar was the acting ruler, serving under his father Nabonidus, which made him the effective second ruler.
And he was so overconfident in Babylon's supposed impregnability that he hosted a massive banquet.
For 1,000 nobles, completely ignoring the fact that the Medo-Persian army was right outside the gates.
And his arrogance, compounded by heavy drinking, led him to desecrate the most potent symbols of Israel's religious life.
This was the ultimate affront to Yahweh. Belshazzar commanded the gold and silver vessels that Nebuchadnezzar had confiscated from the Jerusalem temple to be brought out.
And used them for a party.
He and his nobles used these sacred objects for drinking wine while praising pagan gods, the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. This wasn't just poor etiquette. It was a deliberate, public theological provocation of the God of heaven.
And in that moment of absolute audacious pride, the judgment appears.
Literally written on the plaster wall.
The source material is just incredible in its detail here.
The fingers of a human hand appeared opposite the lampstand and began writing. Belshazzar was instantly terrified. All the color drained from his face, his knees knocked together. He was physically paralyzed by fear.
And his wise men were called in, and they failed again.
Failed absolutely to read or interpret the inscription, proving once again the total bankruptcy of worldly wisdom in the face of divine knowledge.
So Belshazzar offers the highest possible worldly reward.
Purple robes, a gold collar, and to be promoted to the third ruler in the kingdom, which confirms his own status as the second.
He was desperate.
He was. And it was the queen, mother-likely Nebuchadnezzar's daughter, who remembered Daniel's history, who intervened. She reminded the panicked king of Daniel, describing him as a man with an extraordinary spirit and the superior wisdom that had saved the Chaldean wise men decades before.
So she brings the man of God to the king who is dishonoring that very God.
Exactly. And Daniel, now an old man, demonstrates his absolute independence from worldly power. He refuses the lavish rewards offered by a king whose reign he knows is about to end.
And then he just launches into this unflinching, powerful rebuke.
He does. He recounts Nebuchadnezzar's entire history, his pride, his humiliation, his restoration, and then hits Belshazzar with the crucial point.
You knew all this.
You knew all this, yet you still exalted yourself against the Lord of heaven, failing to glorify the God who has in his control your very breath and all your ways.
So he holds him personally accountable for ignoring the historical proof of God's sovereignty.
He does. And that's the setup for the interpretation of the cryptic words. Mene, mene, tekel, parson.
Break those down for us.
Mene is repeated for emphasis. It means numbered. God has counted your kingdom's days and they are finished. The repetition stresses certainty and finality.
Okay.
Tekel means weighed. Daniel tells the king he was put on the divine balances and found utterly lacking, deficient. It's a measure of spiritual worthlessness.
And Paris or Uparson?
That contains a triple meaning, sealing the kingdom's fate. Paris means divided, the kingdom broken into two parts, Media and Persia, but it's also a pun on the word for Persia.
So the verdict was crystal clear.
So decisive it required no extra commentary.
And the consequences were instantaneous. Belshazzar, in a final act of keeping his word, promotes Daniel to third ruler, but the honor was fleeting.
Those ultimate worldly honors lasted only hours. That very night, Belshazzar was killed. The city fell exactly as predicted.
How did it happen?
The sources describe how the Persians, led by a commander named Ugbaru, diverted the Euphrates River, enabling them to walk into the supposedly impenetrable city on the dry riverbed.
And Darius the Mede took control.
In 539 BC, the most powerful empire on earth fell in a single night because of a decree written on a plaster wall. The triumph of Yahweh's judgment over the pride of man was complete.
So the regime changed, but Daniel's administrative excellence was just undeniable. He transitioned seamlessly from serving the defeated Babylonian regime to serving the new Medo-Persian Empire, despite being in his 80s.
Which is an incredible testament to his integrity and his skill. Darius the Mede immediately recognized Daniel's competence and this extraordinary spirit, promoting him to one of 3 supervisors overseeing 120 satraps.
And he intended to elevate him even further.
He did. He wanted to make him prime minister over the entire kingdom. This level of sustained excellence, spanning decades and multiple regimes, is highly unusual and just speaks volumes about Daniel's divine favor.
But this administrative success created a new contest, not against an arrogant king, but against these jealous, petty officials who just couldn't stand his integrity.
The rival officials conspired because Daniel's ethics were forcing them to operate honestly. It was preventing them from graft and corruption.
So they were looking for a way to get rid of him.
Desperately. They tried to find fault with his administrative duties, but the sources explicitly state that he was trustworthy and guilty of no negligence. And this led to their frustration and their tactical conclusion.
We won't find any pretext against this man Daniel unless it is in connection with the law of his God.
Which is the ultimate compliment to his ethical consistency. The only possible flaw they could find was his unflinching devotion to his religion.
So the trap they devised was ingenious, playing directly into the unique limitations of Persian law.
Specifically, its irrevocability, which contrasted so sharply with Nebuchadnezzar's absolute power.
Right. In Persia, the king was bound by his own laws.
Exactly. Once issued, an edict could not be annulled. So the officials tricked Darius into issuing a decree prohibiting praying to any god or human other than the king for 30 days, punishable by the lion's den.
It's a stroke of political genius by the conspirators.
It is. It catered directly to the king's vanity, promoting this form of state humanism where the ruler becomes the momentary sole object of spiritual allegiance. And Darius, perhaps flattered, and certainly without consulting his most trusted advisor, signed the irrevocable decree.
And Daniel knew about it, yet he responded not with panic, but with unwavering fidelity.
A commitment to his customary practice, praying 3 times daily with his windows open toward Jerusalem.
This was the moment of truth. He didn't hide it.
No, he performed his devotion openly. He was making a quiet, firm theological statement. My obedience to the Most High God supersedes any temporary law issued by a human king.
And the accusers found him immediately.
Of course. Knowing his habit, they found him praying and rushed back to inform Darius, stressing that Daniel, one of the captives from Judah, paid no attention to the king's edict.
Darius realized instantly he'd been duped.
He was deeply upset, and he struggled until sunset to find a way to save Daniel. But he was trapped by his own law, the very thing that defined the Silver Kingdom in the dream.
He was helpless under his own system.
He was. And when Daniel was reluctantly thrown into the den, Darius's parting words are so telling. He says, "Your God, whom you continually serve, will rescue you."
Which demonstrates the profound, consistent testimony Daniel had established over decades.
It influenced even the king of Persia to believe in the possibility of a miracle.
And the miracle in the den is one of the most powerful displays of divine intervention in the sources. Daniel was rescued by God's angel closing the lions' mouths because he was found innocent in God's sight.
The scene in the morning, when Darius rushes to the den and finds Daniel alive, is electric. Daniel confirms it. "My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths because I was found innocent before him."
His innocence and faithfulness translated directly into divine protection.
It did, and the divine justice that followed was immediate, swift, and severe, fulfilling that ancient curse against those who curse God's people.
The accusers were thrown into the den.
The accusers, their children, and their wives. The source notes that the lions overpowered them and crushed their bones before they even reached the bottom.
That's not arbitrary cruelty.
No, it's a terrifying display of divine justice aimed at those who maliciously targeted God's faithful servant and attempted to destroy Daniel's God.
And the chapter ends with Darius issuing an even greater testimony than Nebuchadnezzar's final decree.
He issues an edict commanding reverence and fear for the God of Daniel throughout his entire dominion, proclaiming Yahweh the living God, whose kingdom will not be destroyed.
So Daniel was not only spared, but prospered.
And continued to serve the Persian king Cyrus, the same man who would eventually decree the return of the exiles. Once again, God proves his sovereignty, not just over the king's pride, but over their laws, their vanity, and their power to destroy.
We transition now from these thrilling historical narratives to the profound apocalyptic visions that give Daniel its global significance.
Right.
If chapter 2 showed Nebuchadnezzar the kingdoms from man's viewpoint impressive, shiny gold descending to durable iron, chapter 7 shows them from God's viewpoint.
And that is the essential insight. The statue represented the succession of power in terms of human value and material strength. The four beasts of chapter 7 reveal their true, brutal, and rapacious nature.
So these empires weren't built by benevolent governance.
They were established and maintained by force, symbolized by these predatory heraldic beasts. The statue suggested the four empires were one entity, a world empire opposed to God. The beasts show their inner character.
Okay, so let's synthesize these empires across the visions, starting with Babylon.
The head of gold, Babylon, becomes the lion with eagle's wings in chapter 7. The lion is the king of the beasts, symbolizing Babylon's pride and power.
And the wings.
The sources mention the wings were plucked, which symbolizes Nebuchadnezzar's insanity and humiliation from chapter 4. But then it was lifted up and given the heart of a man, which references his restoration and recognition of God's sovereignty.
Okay, next, the Silver Kingdom, Medo-Persia.
This is the lopsided bear with 3 ribs in its mouth. The lopsidedness signifies the greater strength of Persia over Media within that dual empire. The bear devouring much flesh points to its vast territory and relentless conquests.
And chapter 8 reinforces this.
With the ram with 2 horns, one longer than the other, representing Persia as the dominant horn, just butting ferociously in all directions.
The rapid conquest of Alexander the Great's Greece is so beautifully symbolized.
The Bronze Kingdom, Greece, is the fast, powerful leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads. The speed of the leopard combined with the 4 wings denotes the lightning-fast conquests of Alexander.
And the 4 heads?
The 4 divisions of the empire immediately following his sudden death in 323 BC. Chapter 8 echoes this with the male goat, whose massive conspicuous horn Alexander is suddenly broken and replaced by 4 horns.
And finally, the terrifying, indefinable 4th Kingdom, Rome.
This is the dreadful, terrible beast in chapter 7. It had massive iron teeth, crushing and trampling everything, the very nature of Rome's brutal imperial rule.
It's unlike any known animal.
Uniquely terrifying and completely dominating the earth. It had 10 horns, which the sources confirm are 10 future rulers who will arise simultaneously in the final revived or reestablished form of the Roman Empire.
Existing just before Christ's return.
Just before.
Okay, this is where we need to slow down, because the sources present 2 distinct figures referred to as little horns, and mixing them up can, well, it can ruin the entire prophetic timeline.
Absolutely. We have to distinguish between the historical fulfillment and the ultimate final fulfillment. The little horn of chapter 8 is historical,
From the Greek Empire.
He grew out of one of the four Greek divisions, specifically the Seleucid kingdom in Syria. This individual is universally identified as Antiochus V Epiphanes.
And he was known for being arrogant and ambitious.
Exceedingly so. And he committed massive desecration in Jerusalem.
He removed the daily sacrifice and set up the historical abomination that causes desolation.
Correct. In December 168 BC, Antiochus set up an idol of Zeus and sacrificed swine on the sacred altar in Jerusalem. It was the ultimate physical desecration. He acts as a type or a forerunner, a despicable person whose actions foreshadow the greater desolation yet to come.
And the prophecy stated the sanctuary would be put right after 2300 evenings and mornings.
Which led to the Maccabean revolt and the subsequent purification.
Now, contrast him with the little horn of chapter 7. What is the concrete textual evidence that this figure must be the future ultimate Antichrist?
The little horn of chapter 7 arises among the 10 horns of the fourth beast Rome, or revived Rome. So it's geographically and historically separated from the Greek Empire.
And this individual is given global power.
Global power that lasts until the divine judgment. He will have intelligence, human eyes, speak arrogant things against God, humiliate 3 of the 10 final kings, and wage war against the holy ones.
And crucially, his power is limited by a precise time frame.
Time times and half a time, 3.5 years, which corresponds exactly to the period known as the Great Tribulation. He is the final adversary.
So it seems the ultimate purpose of revealing the historical Antiochus was to show Daniel's readers what the final Antichrist's actions would look like.
Exactly. Even if the individual and the time frame were different. Antiochus provides the historical pattern of arrogance, sanctuary desecration, and persecution, setting the stage for the final figure who will perform these actions on a global scale.
Despite the terrifying nature of the fourth beast and the rise of the Antichrist, the vision immediately shifts to the heavenly court. The climax is not human defeat, but a display of overwhelming, absolute, divine power and judgment.
The focus shifts entirely from earth to the Ancient of Days. God the Father taking his seat for judgment. His throne is fire, showing the severity of his righteousness. The books are opened, and the judgment is pronounced.
And the fourth beast is destroyed.
The fourth beast, Rome, or revived Rome, is killed and thrown into flaming fire. The prior 3 empires had their dominion taken away gradually, but the fourth is utterly cut off. It exists no longer.
And then the arrival of this pivotal figure, identified in the sources as one like a son of man.
This is the critical moment. One like a son of man, a figure both human and divine, is escorted before the Ancient of Days and given absolute everlasting ruling authority, honor, and sovereignty over all peoples, nations, and languages.
This is the source material for Jesus Christ's favorite self-designation.
It is, emphasizing his unique role as the promised God-man king who establishes the eternal kingdom of justice.
So the destruction of the kingdom of man, the entire gold-to-clay statue, is immediately followed by the establishment of the kingdom of God, the rock that fills the whole earth.
The connection between the statue and the beasts is finalized right here. The destruction of the fourth kingdom by the fifth, the Messiah's kingdom, will be sudden and literal, initiating the 1,000-year messianic reign on earth and continuing forever. The human systems are violently replaced by the divine system, ensuring Daniel's original purpose proving Yahweh's ultimate control is fulfilled.
Chapter 9 is a remarkable moment of reflection. Daniel, now in his 80s, is studying Jeremiah's prophecy that the exile would last 70 years. Realizing that time was drawing to a close, he prayed intensely, which led to the most intricate and famous of his prophecies, the 70 weeks.
This happened around 538 BC. And Daniel prayed not because the fulfillment was uncertain, but because prayer is the means God often uses to enact his determined will.
And his prayer was a profound confession of Israel's sin.
He acknowledged that they absolutely deserved their punishment, but he sought restoration based purely on God's compassion and faithfulness, not their own righteousness.
And the answer arrived via the angel Gabriel, detailing God's precise future program for Israel in terms of 77s.
77s, meaning 490 years, determined specifically for your people and your holy city, Israel and Jerusalem. This period is set aside to accomplish 6 critical objectives, including ending rebellion, making atonement, bringing in perpetual righteousness, and anointing a most holy place.
This is God's program for Israel's national and spiritual restoration.
It is.
So this timeline is structured with just staggering precision, broken into 3 segments spanning the time until the Messiah.
The sources outline 7 weeks, or 49 years, for the difficult initial rebuilding of Jerusalem. This begins with a decree to restore and rebuild the city, which we know occurred in 444 BC under Artaxerxes,
And then comes the second segment.
of 62 weeks.
So that makes a total of 69 weeks, or 483 prophetic years. Where does this period end?
The calculation is so precise. 483 prophetic years, using a 360-day calendar common in the ancient world, leads directly to the arrival of the Messiah.
And Gabriel predicted that after this period, the Messiah, the Prince, would be cut off.
Cut off and have nothing. A clear, unavoidable reference to the sacrificial crucifixion of Jesus Christ, which historical chronology places around AD 33. This event completes the 69th week perfectly.
But the sources tell us the prophecy just stops right there, creating this vast, indefinite temporal gap between the 69th and 70th week.
And this gap is the current age, the church age. During this indefinite time, two things were prophesied. One, the city and sanctuary were destroyed by the people of the coming prince, which was literally fulfilled by Roman forces in AD 70.
And two,
The world waits for the final 7 years to commence. This gap ensures that the 70 weeks remain centered on Israel and not the church.
so the final 7 years, the 70th week, are entirely future, centered on the final figure of opposition, the Antichrist.
Right. The Antichrist, identified as the prince who will come, the little horn of chapter 7, will confirm a covenant with many, specifically referring to ethnic Jews, for that one final week of 7 years.
This implies a future peace treaty, and crucially suggests Israel will be back in their land.
And worshiping at a rebuilt temple structure in Jerusalem to enable the continuation of sacrifices.
And the covenant is dramatically broken halfway through.
In the middle of that week, after 3.5 years, the Antichrist will halt the sacrifices and offerings. He will set up the ultimate abomination that causes desolation, the full, final fulfillment of the pattern set by Antiochus Epiphanes. This event marks the official start of the most intense 3.5-year period of global distress, known as the Great Tribulation.
Before Daniel received this monumental prophecy, he was fasting and mourning for 3 weeks. Chapter 10 gives us this astonishing, just mind-bending peek behind the curtain of earthly politics.
Into the unseen spiritual warfare that dictates human history.
It's truly where the sources get interesting.
The angel who arrived to deliver the message revealed that his arrival was delayed 21 days due to intense opposition from the prince of the kingdom of Persia.
And this prince is not the human King Darius.
No, it's a fallen angel, a high-ranking demonic power assigned to influence that nation's political and spiritual affairs, working to oppose God's plan for Israel's return.
Wait, stop. So we just learned that the success or failure of earthly political decisions isn't just about troop movements or human negotiations. It was determined by an invisible struggle in the heavenly realms lasting 21 days.
Yes.
That changes the context of all geopolitical history.
It fundamentally reframes it. The sources reveal that the struggles between nations are merely reflections of a higher, unseen conflict. This angel was only able to break free and reach Daniel when Michael, one of the leading princes, a holy archangel commissioned to defend Daniel and the Jewish people, came to help.
So the political stability that allowed Daniel to prosper and the eventual decree allowing the Jews to return were not accidents.
They were the direct result of a grueling 21-day angelic battle.
After this incredible revelation, the prophecy shifts in chapter 11, giving this detailed, almost tedious list of future history. Why did Daniel need this highly specific, near-term history?
Verses 2 through 35 are astounding for their accuracy. They detail events that would happen hundreds of years later. It outlines the rise and fall of 4 Persian kings, Alexander the Great, and then the long, brutal conflicts between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids.
The king of the north versus the king of the south?
The king of the north was the Seleucid dynasty, based in modern-day Syria. The king of the south was the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt.
And Israel was geographically trapped right in the middle of these two warring dynasties.
Exactly. And this exhaustive detail served a crucial purpose for the exiled readers. It was proof. By accurately predicting these complex, centuries-long wars, God ensured that when the next event, the persecution under Antiochus Epiphanes, happened, Daniel's readers would know that God had foreknowledge of every single event.
So it bolstered their thought that if the near-term prophecies were perfectly accurate,
the long-term, far-future prophecies must also be trusted.
Okay, now we hit the temporal break, signaled in the sources by a subtle shift in language. We leap from the historical persecution under Antiochus to the distant, unfulfilled future of the Antichrist.
The shift is signaled by the description of the future king who will do as he pleases, exalting himself above every deity and not respecting the true God. This man of power and pride will honor a god of fortresses, implying he idolizes military might, technology, or pure materialism.
Dedicating massive resources to his military machine.
Exactly.
And the end of the age will be marked by massive global conflict centered specifically on the Holy Land.
At the time of the end, the Antichrist is attacked by the king of the south and the king of the north. He invades the beautiful land, which is Israel or Palestine, conquers Egypt, plunders their resources, and sets up his headquarters in Jerusalem.
And the sources describe him setting out in a tremendous rage.
After being troubled by reports from the east and north. But the prophecy concludes swiftly with his destruction by divine means. He will come to his end with no one to help him, destroyed by Christ's return.
And chapter 12 provides the ultimate deliverance for Israel and humanity's final hope.
At that specific time of extreme distress, unlike any other in history, Michael, the great prince, will arise in defense of his people, Israel. Those Jews whose names are written in the book will experience national deliverance.
And profoundly, this final chapter affirms the doctrine of resurrection.
Which was a subject of intense debate among Jewish sects, yes.
Oh.
Many of those who sleep in the dusty ground will awake, some to everlasting life, and others to shame and everlasting abhorrence.
The very end of the prophecy gives us two confusing but numerically precise chronologies, the 12,090 days and the 335 days. For the average listener, how do we understand these final numbers without getting lost in the math?
The importance is not the specific number, but the concept. The intense persecution is confirmed to last for 3.5 years. The two subsequent numbers, 1,290 and 1,335 days, are 30 days and 75 days longer, respectively, than that period.
Okay.
This strongly indicates that following the physical end of the Great Tribulation, when the Antichrist is destroyed, there will be a short, specific period of divine administrative activity, judgment, and purification before the eternal Messianic kingdom is fully inaugurated.
A cleanup and transition phase.
That's a great way to put it.
And Daniel, after receiving this monumental, spanning blueprint of all history, was instructed to just seal and close up the book.
Yes, until the time of the end when knowledge will increase. The promise was that understanding these truths would require considerable effort and time, but eventually, the wise, those who heed divine revelation, will understand them.
So the fulfillment of this prophecy will not convert the wicked.
No, but it will bring purification and deep cleansing to God's loyal people.
What an incredible scope we covered today. From a young captive refusing the king's meat to an elderly statesman receiving a 490-year prophecy that maps the rise and fall of every global power destined to impact his people.
The book of Daniel is absolutely essential to understanding the structure of all biblical prophecy, but its core message remains beautifully simple: God's absolute sovereignty.
Right.
Every single contest, every historical event, every political figure we discussed, Nebuchadnezzar's pride, Belshazzar's downfall, Daniel's survival in the den, it all demonstrates one truth.
That the fortunes of kings and the affairs of men are subject to God's eternal decrees.
Exactly. It provides the ultimate vindication for Yahweh. It proves he had not abandoned or lost control of his people during the exile. He was merely disciplining them within a strict, predetermined timeline with a certain glorious future in mind.
The wise, Daniel was promised, will ultimately understand these complex things as history unfolds and knowledge increases.
And I think we just have to return to that staggering glimpse into the angelic conflict in chapter 10.
I was thinking the same thing.
Despite the terrifying nature of the future conflict described, the Antichrist, global wars, intense persecution, Daniel found profound strength in the knowledge that Michael, your prince, stood ready to defend his people in the unseen realm.
And that is the lasting takeaway for you. What does that realization, that unseen champions, mighty angels, are actively involved in defending the people of God against demonic forces behind earthly conflicts, what does that change about how you view the challenges you face today? The most determined human opposition is always operating on a stage whose curtain is pulled by a higher, unseen angelic force commissioned by the Most High God. Something to mull over as you watch the global news tonight.